My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. My in-laws, Richard and Eleanor, just left for a 2-week, all-expenses-paid luxury vacation to Hawaii, and they left me behind to look after their silent child. They stood there in their marble-floored foyer, smelling of expensive sunscreen and entitlement, and handed me a list of chores as if I were the hired help. They had no idea that just 5 minutes after their Uber disappeared down the long, winding driveway, their silent little girl would look me straight in the eyes and speak her first words. And those words contained the secret that would unravel their entire empire of lies. The scene is still burned into my mind. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was wearing a cream-colored linen pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, and her smile was tight and insincere. Richard, my father-in-law, stood beside her, jangling the keys to his Mercedes, a man who had never experienced a single day of genuine hardship. They looked like a magazine ad for a life I was not invited to. My husband, their son, Mark, stood slightly behind them, looking at the floor, a familiar posture of defeat he always adopted in their presence. "Now, Clara," Eleanor began, her voice dripping with condescension, "the instructions are all on the fridge. We've left you $100 for groceries for the 2 weeks. That should be more than enough for you and Lily." She waved a dismissive hand in the direction of the small figure half hidden behind the grand staircase. That was my niece, 6-year-old Lily, the girl who never spoke, the family's silent, beautiful, inconvenient burden. Richard cleared his throat. "And while you're here, the garden could use some serious weeding. The west-facing windows are a disgrace, so see to those. And I've left some financial documents on my desk that need to be sorted and filed alphabetically. It'll give you something productive to do." He said it with a smirk, as if the idea of me being productive was a novel concept. He conveniently ignored the fact that I had a full-time remote job as a graphic designer, a job he frequently referred to as my little computer hobby. I just nodded. Arguing was pointless. It was like reasoning with a tidal wave. They saw me as nothing more than an extension of their son, and since they saw their son as a disappointment who married beneath his station, I was practically invisible. Mark, bless his heart, tried to interject. "Dad, Clara has her own work to do. We can hire a gardener when you get back." Eleanor shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark. Why would we pay for something the family can do? Clara is family. She should be happy to contribute." The word family sounded like an accusation coming from her lips. She made it sound like a debt I could never repay. Have you ever been made to feel like the family servant instead of a family member? Tell me your story in the comments below. Knowing I'm not alone in this makes a world of difference. And please remember to subscribe so you can see how this all ends. The worst part was how they talked about Lily. They never spoke to her directly, only about her, usually in hushed, frustrated tones, as if she were a broken appliance. "Her therapist says it's selective mutism," Eleanor would sigh dramatically at family dinners. "She simply refuses to engage, so stubborn." They treated her silence not as a symptom of some deeper pain, but as an act of defiance aimed squarely at them. They had paraded her from one expensive specialist to another, not out of concern for her well-being, but out of concern for how her condition reflected on them, on the perfect facade of the family. They saw her as flawed, defective, an embarrassment to their pristine bloodline. And now, for 2 weeks, this flawed child was my responsibility. Eleanor walked over to Lily, who was clutching a worn, one-eyed teddy bear, and patted her on the head without any real affection. "Be a good girl for your Aunt Clara," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Try not to be too much of a bother." Lily didn't flinch. She didn't look up. Her world was contained in the small space she occupied on the bottom step, her gaze fixed on the scuffed toes of her little shoes. My heart ached for her. I saw a lonely little girl, and they saw a problem to be managed. Finally, they were ready to leave. Richard clapped Mark on the shoulder. "Try to close that deal while I'm gone, son. Don't mess it up." Another casual, soul-crushing jab. Then he looked at me. "Don't burn the house down," he said with a chuckle, as if it were a genuine possibility. Eleanor gave me one last evaluative look, her eyes scanning my simple jeans and t-shirt with clear disdain before turning and sweeping out the door. Mark gave me a quick, apologetic kiss on the cheek and mumbled, "Sorry, Clara, I'll call you every night," before trailing after them like a scolded puppy. The heavy oak door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous hallway. The engine of the luxury SUV purred to life and then faded into the distance. Silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that was a hallmark of my in-laws' home. It was just me and Lily. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that probably cost more than my car. I felt a wave of exhaustion and resentment wash over me. I was trapped in their perfect house, with their perfect rules, and their imperfect child. I was the free labor, the trusted warden for their family secret. They thought they had everything figured out. They thought they had put me in my place, a powerless babysitter with a to-do list. They thought they were flying off to paradise, leaving all their problems behind. They had no idea they had just left me alone with the one person who held the truth. I let out a long sigh and turned to the little girl on the stairs. I gave her a small, gentle smile, not expecting anything in return. "Well, Lily," I said softly, my voice sounding small in the big, empty house. "Looks like it's just you and me for a while. I was thinking we could start by ignoring that stupid list and making a giant pillow fort in the living room. What do you think?" I expected nothing. The same blank, silent stare I always got. But this time was different. This time, her head tilted. Slowly, she lifted her eyes from her shoes and looked at me. Really looked at me. Her eyes were a deep, intelligent blue, and for the first time, they weren't empty. They were focused. She looked at me, then at the front door, where her parents had just left. A tiny frown creased her forehead. And then, it happened. In a voice that was small, but perfectly clear, as if she'd been speaking her whole life, she said, "They aren't my real parents." The air in the grand, silent foyer seemed to crackle. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. The words were so soft, so unexpected, they felt like a trick of the mind. But Lily was still looking at me, her blue eyes wide and serious. She hadn't spoken in the 3 years I'd known her, and now, this. They aren't my real parents. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. And in that instant, the entire history of my relationship with Mark's family snapped into sharp, painful focus. The years of quiet slights, of being treated as an outsider, of being their designated failure, all of it was a lead-up to this moment. This campaign of humiliation started the day Mark brought me home to meet them. I remember walking into this very house, my hand clammy in Mark's, feeling like a field mouse entering a lion's den. I was a scholarship kid from a working-class family who had built a successful graphic design business from scratch. To them, I was dirt. Eleanor had looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my off-the-rack dress, and said, "Oh, you're prettier than we imagined." It was meant to sound like a compliment, but the subtext was clear. A girl from my background had to have some physical asset to trap a man like their son. Richard just grunted and asked me what my father did for a living. When I told him he was a retired mechanic, he simply turned his back on me and started talking to Mark about the stock market. They never got over it. To them, Mark's choice to marry me was his ultimate failure. He was supposed to marry a woman from their world, a daughter of some CEO or surgeon, someone to solidify the family's social standing. Instead, he chose me. They made our life a quiet hell. They gifted us the down payment for our modest apartment, a fact they brought up at every opportunity, a constant reminder of our dependence. When my design business started to take off and I landed a major client, Richard patted me on the head at a family dinner and announced to the table, "Isn't that cute? Clara's little computer hobby is actually making some pocket money." He said it with a laugh, and everyone laughed with him, including Mark, who just gave me a weak, apologetic shrug from across the table. His spine, I learned early on, was made of jelly where his parents were concerned. Then, about 3 years ago, came the announcement of Lily. It was presented as a late-in-life miracle. Eleanor, then in her late 50s, was supposedly pregnant. It was all very hush-hush at first, then announced with a carefully curated story of shock and joy. "We thought our time had passed," Eleanor would say, placing a hand on her stomach, which never seemed to grow in a way that looked natural. But God has blessed us one last time. They threw a lavish baby shower, but it felt more like a business merger than a celebration of new life. It was about showcasing their vitality, their wealth, their ability to produce an heir, even at an advanced age. Lily was born, or rather, she appeared. We never saw Eleanor in a hospital. They claimed it was a private birthing center, very exclusive. One day, there was just a baby. A beautiful, quiet baby. And from the beginning, they were awful to her. They had the best nanny, the most expensive toys, a nursery that looked like a magazine cover, but they had no warmth. They held her like she was a porcelain doll they were afraid of breaking, or worse, getting dirty. Richard would complain about the crying. Eleanor would fret about the inconvenience of it all. They loved the idea of Lily, the status symbol of a miracle baby, but they seemed to have no idea how to love the child herself. And then, around the time she was 3, she stopped talking. It started slowly. She grew more and more withdrawn. The laughter faded first, then the babbling, until one day there was only silence. This is when their frustration truly began to fester. Her silence was a flaw in their perfect narrative. They dragged her to specialist after specialist, not with the quiet desperation of worried parents, but with the loud indignation of consumers who had received a defective product. They would return from these appointments, and Eleanor would complain, "Another $500 for him to tell us she's just being stubborn. She does it to get attention, you know." But I saw something else. I saw a little girl who was terrified. In a house where every word was a potential weapon, where love was conditional and affection was a transaction, silence was her only armor. I was the only one she seemed to relax around. I wasn't family, not really, so I wasn't part of the system that was hurting her. I would sit on the floor of her immaculate room and draw with her for hours, neither of us speaking. I'd read her stories, giving all the characters funny voices, and sometimes I'd see the ghost of a smile on her lips. They saw this, and they resented it. "She's manipulating you, Clara," Eleanor once told me, her voice sharp. "She knows you're a soft touch." They couldn't comprehend a relationship that wasn't based on control. They couldn't understand that I was simply being kind. So they decided I was being a fool. Leaving her with me for 2 weeks wasn't a sign of trust. It was the ultimate dismissal. I was the fool, good enough to handle the broken toy while they vacationed in paradise. I knelt down on the cold marble floor, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had to be careful. 1,000 questions exploded in my mind, but I couldn't bombard her. I had to protect this fragile, newly opened door. I met her gaze and kept my voice soft. Just a whisper between the two of us. "Okay, Lily," I said. "Thank you for telling me that. That was very brave." She watched me, her expression unreadable, as if she was gauging my reaction. She was testing the waters, testing me. I reached out my hand, palm up, not to touch her, but as an offering. "Can you tell me more?" I asked gently. "Only if you want to." She took a small step down, then another, until she was standing in front of me. She looked so small in that enormous hall. She pointed her little finger back at her one-eyed teddy bear, which she'd left on the stairs. "Teddy knows," she whispered. Teddy was there. I followed her gaze to the bear. It was an old, well-loved thing with matted fur and a missing eye. It looked like any other childhood toy. "Teddy was where, sweetie?" "With my real mommy," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "She gave me Teddy before the scary grandma took me away." Scary grandma. Eleanor. The blood in my veins went cold. A story started to form in my head, a dark and twisted fairy tale. I had to know more, but I also had to get her out of this oppressive house. The walls felt like they were listening. My first instinct was to call Mark, to tell him what was happening. But I stopped myself. What would he do? He'd panic. He'd call his parents. And they would come back, not with explanations, but with lawyers and threats. They would spin a story, say Lily was confused, that I was putting ideas in her head. They would silence her again, this time for good. And they would destroy me in the process. No. For the first time, I realized I couldn't rely on my husband. This was bigger than him. He was a part of the system that had allowed this to happen. A willing or at least compliant spectator. This was my fight now. My responsibility, my decision. That was the turning point. The moment I chose to stop being the family doormat and become Lily's advocate. My loyalty wasn't to the people who had spent years belittling me. It was to the terrified child who had just trusted me with her truth. "Okay, Lily," I said, my voice firm with a newfound resolve. "Let's get Teddy. And then, you and I are going to build the biggest, best pillow fort this house has ever seen. And you can tell me and Teddy all about your real mommy." She gave me a small, hesitant nod. As I helped her gather the bear, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tucked into a small, hand-stitched pocket on the bear's back was a folded piece of paper. It was old and creased. My fingers trembled as I carefully worked it free. Lily watched me, her eyes knowing. "Mommy put it there," she said. "She said to give it to someone nice." My heart ached. Someone nice. For 3 years, this little girl had been waiting for someone nice. I unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in a delicate looping cursive. It began, "To whoever finds my daughter, my Lily." The letter was from a woman named Sarah. She explained that she was Richard's personal assistant. They had been having an affair for years. When she got pregnant, Richard promised her the world, but Eleanor found out. Instead of a messy public divorce that would threaten their fortune, Eleanor devised a cruel plan. They would take the baby. They would fake a late-in-life pregnancy and raise Lily as their own, a testament to their enduring power. They paid Sarah a sum of money, enough to disappear, but not enough to fight them, and threatened to ruin her life, to make sure she never saw her daughter again if she ever spoke a word of it. The letter was her only hope, a desperate message in a bottle, tucked away with her daughter's only link to her past. It ended with a plea. "Please, find me. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I live in hope, every single day, that I will hold my baby again." Reading those words, a fire ignited inside me. It wasn't just injustice anymore. It was a crime. It was kidnapping, coercion, a level of cold, calculated cruelty that I could barely comprehend. They hadn't just lied. They had stolen a child from her mother to use as a prop in their pathetic play of perfection. And they had left me, the person they disdained most, in charge of the evidence. That chore list on the fridge suddenly seemed like a cosmic joke. Richard wanted me to sort his financial documents? Oh, I would sort them. I would go through every single piece of paper in his office. I would find the payoff to Sarah Jenkins. I would find the fake medical records for Eleanor's pregnancy. I would find everything. They had given me the keys to the kingdom, assuming I was too stupid to know which doors to open. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated Lily. And that was going to be the biggest mistake of their lives. I looked at Lily, who was now hugging her bear tightly. "Don't you worry," I told her, my voice shaking with rage and determination. "We're going to find your mommy, I promise." The next 10 days were a blur of covert operations disguised as domesticity. On the surface, I was the perfect, dutiful daughter-in-law. I weeded the garden, I washed the windows, and I cared for Lily. But my real work began after she went to bed each night. With Sarah's letter safely photographed and stored on a secure cloud server, I turned my attention to Richard's home office. He had called it a productive task. He had no idea. The office was a monument to his ego. Dark wood, leather-bound books he'd never read, and a desk the size of a small boat. And on that desk was the stack of financial documents he'd so helpfully left for me. It was like a treasure map, and I was the only one who knew what I was looking for. For 3 nights, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of justice, I sorted. I sorted alphabetically, just as he'd asked, but I also sorted chronologically and by payee. I was looking for a needle in a haystack, a single payment to a woman named Sarah Jenkins made about 6 years ago. Meanwhile, my days were spent with Lily. Now that the dam had broken, words poured out of her. We built that pillow fort, a sprawling castle of cushions and blankets in the middle of their pristine living room. And inside our castle, she told me everything. She told me about a sunny apartment with a yellow kitchen, about a mommy who sang to her and called her my little wildflower. She had only fragmented memories, the flashes of a life before this one, but they were vivid and full of love. It was clear her silence hadn't been an act of defiance. It was an act of grief and fear. In this cold, sterile mansion where emotions were a weakness, she had locked her memories away to keep them safe. With me, they were safe. Mark called every evening, his voice tinny from thousands of miles away. "How's everything going? Is Lily being a handful?" he'd ask. I had to bite my tongue so hard it bled. "Everything's fine, Mark," I'd say, my voice a perfect imitation of calm. "We're just hanging out. Lily's being an angel." I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Telling him would be like firing a warning shot. I needed the element of surprise. I needed my weapons fully assembled before the battle began. On the fourth night, I found it. It wasn't a direct payment to Sarah Jenkins. Richard was too clever for that. It was a wire transfer for $250,000 to a shell corporation I'd never heard of, SJ Holdings LLC. The date on the transfer was just 2 weeks after Lily's supposed birth date. My hands shook. SJ Sarah Jenkins. It had to be. I took a photo of the wire transfer record with my phone, my heart hammering. This was the first piece of hard evidence. But I needed more. The money proved a payoff, but not what it was for. I needed to connect the corporation to Sarah. So I used my little computer hobby. My graphic design skills also meant I was an expert at online research, at digging through digital breadcrumbs. I spent the next 2 nights cross-referencing public records, business registration databases, and archived social media profiles. It took hours, but I finally found it. A registration document for SJ Holdings LLC, filed in a neighboring state. The sole proprietor listed on the document was Sarah Jenkins. I had them. The next step was finding Sarah herself. The letter gave me her name, but no address. I started with social media, searching for any trace of her. I found dozens of Sarah Jenkinses, but none that fit. I then used a paid background check service, something I used occasionally for vetting new freelance clients. I entered her name and the state where the LLC was registered. After a few tense minutes, a result popped up. An address, a phone number. She lived in a small town about 3 hours away. I knew I had to go. I couldn't just call. This was too delicate. I had to see her in person, show her the letter, show her a recent photo of her daughter. I packed a small bag for myself and Lily, telling Mark on the phone that we were taking a day trip to the Children's Museum in the next city over. He bought it completely. "That's nice of you, Clara," he'd said. Keeping her occupied? He had no idea. The drive was nerve-wracking. Lily was buzzing with a quiet, anxious energy in the back seat, clutching Teddy. "Are we going to see my real mommy?" she asked, her voice small. "We're going to try, sweetie," I said, my own hope warring with my fear. "We're going to try." When we found the address, it was a modest but well-kept little house with a small garden full of wildflowers. My heart was in my throat as I walked up the path, holding Lily's hand. I knocked on the door. It opened, and a woman with kind, sad eyes and the same shade of brown hair as Lily stood there. She looked at me. Then her gaze fell to the little girl beside me, to the one-eyed teddy bear clutched in her arms. The woman's face crumpled. Her hand flew to her mouth and a sob escaped her lips. "Lily," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My little wildflower?" Lily, who had been hiding behind my legs, peeked out. She looked at the woman, her head tilted. And then, a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. "Mommy," she said. The reunion between Sarah and Lily was the most heartbreakingly beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. All the planning, the risk, the cold fury that had been driving me, it all melted away in that moment, replaced by the pure, undeniable power of a mother's love. We spent the next 2 days at Sarah's house, where I laid out all the evidence I had found. Sarah, in turn, filled in the gaps. She had kept everything. The threatening letters from Eleanor's lawyer, a secret recording of a conversation with Richard where he admitted Lily was his daughter, and a signed non-disclosure agreement that was so coercive it was legally dubious. Together, we had an ironclad case. We contacted a high-powered family law attorney, a woman known for taking on Goliaths like my in-laws, and prepared for battle. The day Richard and Eleanor were due back from Hawaii, I set the stage. I cleaned the house to perfection, removing all traces of our pillow fort and our secret investigation. The chore list was neatly checked off and left on the kitchen counter. I made sure the west-facing windows gleamed. To them, it would look like nothing had changed. It would look like I had been the good, obedient little wife. I sent Lily to stay with a trusted friend of Sarah's for the day, armed with a new backpack full of coloring books. The final piece of the puzzle was my husband. I called Mark an hour before his parents were due to land and told him he needed to come to his parents' house immediately. I told him there was a family emergency and that I would explain when he arrived. The panic in his voice was familiar. When Richard and Eleanor swept through the front door, they were tanned, relaxed, and dripping with smug satisfaction. "Ah, Clara!" Richard boomed, dropping his designer luggage on the floor. "The house is still standing, I see. Good girl." Eleanor glided past me, running a finger along a tabletop, checking for dust. "And Lily? I trust she wasn't too much of a nuisance." "She was wonderful," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "In fact, she's been very talkative lately." A flicker of annoyance crossed Eleanor's face. "Oh, well, that phase will pass. Did you get Richard's filing done?" "I did," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "It was very educational." Just then, Mark rushed in, his face pale with worry. "Clara? What's wrong? Where's Lily?" He looked from me to his parents, confused. "That's an excellent question, Mark," I said, turning to my in-laws. "Why don't you tell him where Lily really is? Or better yet, who she really is?" The air turned electric. Richard's jovial mask dropped. Eleanor's eyes narrowed into slits. "What is the meaning of this, Clara? Have you been filling the child's head with nonsense?" "No," I said, my voice ringing with authority in the silent hall. "Lily has been filling my head with the truth, a truth I confirmed." I walked over to the grand mahogany table in the center of the foyer and laid out my evidence, one piece at a time. A copy of the wire transfer to S.J. Holdings, a printout of the LLC registration in Sarah Jenkins' name, a copy of the letter from Teddy's pocket. Richard went ashen. He looked at the papers as if they were snakes. Mark stared, his mouth hanging open. What is this?" he stammered. "This," I said, "is a payoff. $250,000 paid to a woman named Sarah Jenkins, your father's former assistant, to buy her silence after she gave birth to his illegitimate daughter." Eleanor lunged forward. "This is slander. You are a pathetic, jealous little girl, making up lies." "Am I?" I replied, my voice like ice. "Then perhaps you can explain this." I pulled out my phone and played the audio file Sarah had given me. Richard's voice filled the hall, clear as day. "Of course she's mine, Sarah, but Eleanor can never know the truth. We will raise her. It's the only way to protect the family, to protect the inheritance." Mark stumbled back as if he'd been physically struck. "Dad," he whispered, his eyes wide with betrayal. "Mom?" Eleanor's face was a mask of pure hatred. "You were nothing before we let you into this family. We gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," I retorted, the fire I'd been suppressing for years finally erupting. "You humiliated me. You belittled my work. You treated me like a servant. You used your own son as a whipping boy to feed your egos. And you stole a child. You stole her from her mother, condemned her to a life of emotional neglect, and called it a miracle, just to prop up your fragile, pathetic image." Just then, the doorbell rang. Richard and Eleanor froze. I smiled. "I believe that's for you." I opened the door to reveal Sarah, standing tall and resolute, with her lawyer by her side, and behind them a uniformed police officer. Sarah's eyes locked with Richard's, and for the first time I saw him truly afraid. He wasn't afraid of losing his money or his reputation. He was afraid of the woman he had wronged. "Richard! Eleanor!" Sarah's lawyer said, her voice crisp and professional. "My client, Sarah Jenkins, is here to reclaim her daughter, Lily Jenkins. We have evidence of custodial interference, parental kidnapping, and extortion. The officer is here to ensure a peaceful transfer. We can settle this civilly, or we can pursue criminal charges. The choice is yours." Eleanor let out a strangled gasp. Richard stared, speechless, his empire of lies crumbling around him. Mark just looked at the floor, the same posture of defeat I'd seen 100 times, but this time it wasn't for them. It was for himself, for his own cowardice. I looked at the chaos I had unleashed. The satisfaction was overwhelming. If you've ever had a moment where you finally stood up for yourself and watched the tables turn, give this video a like. It's a feeling of justice that everyone deserves to experience. The power had shifted. The truth was out. And the silent, underestimated daughter-in-law they had so carelessly dismissed was the one who had brought their whole world crashing down. Checkmate. In the deafening silence that followed the lawyer's ultimatum, you could see the exact moment Richard and Eleanor's carefully constructed world shattered. Their tans couldn't hide the sickly pallor that crept over their faces. The power, the arrogance, the absolute certainty they had worn like a second skin. It all evaporated, leaving behind two old, frightened people. They had built their kingdom on a foundation of lies, and I had just pulled out the cornerstone. Faced with public humiliation, jail time, and financial ruin, they folded. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming breakdown. It was worse. It was a quiet, pathetic deflation. They knew they had no move left to make. Their high-priced lawyers would be no match for the mountain of evidence we had, especially with the personal testimony of a now verbal child. They agreed to everything. Sarah's lawyer was brilliant. She handled the negotiations swiftly and brutally. They signed a full confession, admitting to the fraudulent adoption and the coercion of Sarah. They legally relinquished all parental rights to Lily, effective immediately. A new birth certificate was expedited, listing Sarah Jenkins as the mother and Richard as the father, and then came the financial settlement. It wasn't just about giving back the hush money. It was about reparations. A significant portion of Richard's assets was transferred into a trust for Lily, a trust that Sarah would manage, ensuring her daughter would have every opportunity in life that had been stolen from her. It was enough to guarantee that Sarah and Lily would be secure for the rest of their lives. It was also enough to cripple Richard's company and force them into a drastic, humiliating downsizing of their lifestyle. The marble foyer, the Mercedes, the Hawaii vacations, all of it was about to become a memory. As the lawyers finalized the paperwork, I stood back and watched the final act of my old life play out. Mark finally looked up from the floor, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading mix of shame and confusion. He came towards me. "Clara, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "Didn't you, Mark?" I asked, my voice devoid of the anger I felt before, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed pity. "Or was it just easier not to know? You saw how they treated her. You saw how they treated me. You knew something was wrong, but you were too scared to stand up to them. You chose their comfort over your own wife's dignity, over a little girl's well-being. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. And in that moment, I knew my marriage was over. It hadn't ended in that foyer. It had been dying a slow death for years. His silence, his complicity, his weakness. It was a poison that had finally done its work. I had outgrown him. I had found my own spine. And I couldn't be with a man who so willingly misplaced his. "I've already packed my things," I told him quietly. "They're in my car. I'll have a lawyer contact you about the divorce." He started to protest, to beg, but there was nothing left to say. I turned my back on him, on his parents, on the whole toxic dynasty, and walked out of that house for the last time. The freedom was breathtaking. It was more than just leaving a bad marriage or escaping toxic in-laws. It was the freedom of knowing my own strength. They had tried to make me small, to make me feel worthless, but they had failed. Their little computer hobby had been the weapon that brought them down. Their incompetent daughter-in-law was the one who had orchestrated their demise. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I met Sarah and her lawyer at a coffee shop a few blocks away. Lily was there, brought by Sarah's friend. When she saw me, she ran and threw her arms around my legs. "Aunt Clara!" she yelled, her voice bright and happy. I knelt and hugged her tight. "You were so brave," I told her. Sarah was crying, but for the first time, they were tears of joy. "I don't know how I can ever thank you, Clara." "You don't have to," I said, smiling. "Seeing you two together is all the thanks I need." We sat there for a while, 3 survivors making plans for a new beginning. Sarah and Lily were going to take a trip, just the 2 of them, to see the ocean, to make new memories to replace the stolen years. And me? I was going to find a new apartment, focus on my business, which was now more successful than ever, and rediscover who Clara was without the weight of that family dragging her down. For the first time in a very long time, my future was entirely my own. I was free. It's been 6 months now. I live in a bright, airy apartment downtown, filled with my own furniture and my own art. My graphic design business is thriving. Without the constant stress and belittling from my old life, my creativity has exploded. I'm landing bigger clients than ever before, and I'm finally proud to say that my little computer hobby has made me completely independent. I don't need anyone's approval anymore. I've found my own. I'm still very close with Sarah and Lily. In fact, I've become Aunt Clara in a way that's real and true, built on love and respect, not on a hollow family connection. Lily is a different child. She's bright, funny, and chatters away constantly. She's enrolled in a new school and has tons of friends. To see her laughing, free from the oppressive silence of that house, is the greatest victory of all. She and Sarah send me postcards from their adventures. They finally took that trip to the ocean. The picture they sent me, Lily splashing in the waves, Sarah watching with a look of pure joy, is framed on my desk. It's a daily reminder of what we fought for. As for Richard and Eleanor, from what I hear, their life is a shadow of what it once was. They had to sell the mansion and move into a much smaller condo. Their social circle, built on the illusion of wealth and power, quickly abandoned them when the truth of their scandal inevitably leaked out. They are isolated, diminished, and left with nothing but each other and the bitter reality of their choices. I don't waste my energy hating them. I just feel a distant sort of pity. They had everything, but in their greed and arrogance, they lost the only thing that truly matters: their humanity. Mark tried to contact me a few times, but I never responded. His chapter is closed. Looking back, the most important lesson I learned is that people will only have the power over you that you allow them to have. For years, I let them define my worth. I sought their approval, hoping that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, and compliant enough, they would finally accept me. But their game was rigged from the start. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a subject. The moment I stopped playing their game and started writing my own rules was the moment I became free. It all started because a little girl decided to trust me, to speak her truth. Her courage gave me courage. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is listen, and the second bravest thing is to act on what you hear. Your voice matters. Your story matters. If you've ever felt silenced or underestimated, know that there is incredible strength within you waiting to be unleashed. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share your own experiences with finding your voice in the comments. Your story could be the spark that helps someone else find theirs. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and empowerment. You are stronger than you think.